Chanterelle's mother loved to cook. The cakes, the breads, the soups and stews, well, everything. Oh, she didn't have to cook. She was the mistress of a large and fine house and estate, and her husband was a man of considerable wealth and influence. They had servants, including an excellent cook. But it pleased her to be in the kitchen, kneading the crusty bread, frosting the delicate cakes, seasoning the sauces with herbs from the garden and mushrooms that she gathered in the woods. She loved mushrooms. After all, hadn't she named her only child Chanterelle? Life was good. And then the year that Chanterelle was 11 years old, her mother became ill, and even though she received the very best medical care that was available in that day and in that time, she grew weaker and weaker, and finally it was clear that she would die. At the end, she summoned Chanterelle to her. She gave her a blessing and also a silver locket and a piece of wisdom. A trail will lead you into the woods. Iron and silver will lead you home again. And then she died. Chanterelle wept and mourned, and her father did too. But after a year, her father went into the city on business, and when he returned, he brought with him a new wife. At first, Chanterelle was pleased. She liked to see that the light was back in her father's eyes, and she imagined that she would be just as happy with a new mother as he was with a new wife. But alas, Chanterelle's stepmother proved to be distant. And in only 6 months' time, her father went back into the city on business, and this time he came back not with a new wife, but with a cough and a fever. In 3 days he was dead, and everything changed. Chanterelle's stepmother said that she would not throw her out for charity's sake, but now she would have to earn her keep. And so Chanterelle was no longer welcome in the dining room or the library or the ballroom where her stepmother entertained party after party of her rich and fancy friends. Now Chanterelle was to be the cook's assistant, and her companions were the cook and the blacksmith, the gardener, the shepherd, and his son. But she found that these simple folk were not only kinder, but also more intelligent and resourceful than any of her stepmother's fancy friends. The cook was glad for her help, especially when there was a party being planned. But she didn't always need Chanterelle's assistance. And so she spent a good deal of time with the sheep and with Ewan, the shepherd's son. He was happy for her help as well, especially when they had to search for a lost lamb. Sometimes they would go into the village. They liked to visit the blacksmith's shop, where they watched him forge the nails and locks and horseshoes. One day they begged for a chance to make something themselves, and the blacksmith relented. He told them how to forge the square-headed nails and gave them each a chance. Ewan's turned out well, and he presented it to Chanterelle as a gift with a laugh and a bow. One day, midsummer it was, Chanterelle had just finished scrubbing the hearth, and she went to the door to throw out the bucket of water. But there she saw something unusual. Mushrooms. Oh, not just one here and one there, but a trail of mushrooms leading from the door across the lawn and into the woods. She set down the bucket and began to follow that trail of mushrooms. Once in the woods, she thought she'd lost it several times, but then she would spy a small mushroom, half hidden by a leaf, or under a vine, or obscured by a rock. And in this way, she went deeper and deeper and deeper into the woods. Finally, she came to a clearing, and there in the clearing were more mushrooms, not a trail this time, but a circle, a perfect circle. As she got closer, she could hear sounds coming from inside that ring, sounds of laughter, sounds of music, and as she looked out of the corner of her eye, she could see fairies inside the ring. They were dancing and singing and laughing, And Chanterelle watched, enchanted. When they came to the end of a song, one of the fairies came to the very edge of that fairy ring and held out her hand to Chanterelle and said, "Join us." Enchanted, Chanterelle took the fairy's hand and allowed herself to be drawn into the circle. And she spent the rest of that day singing and dancing with the fairies. She sang songs she'd never heard before and danced dances that she'd never seen before. And when the sun went down and the moon rose, a door opened in the fairy hill, and Chanterelle entered with the fairies. Chanterelle stayed with the fairies for a long time or a short time. She could not have told you, but the fairies were kind to her. They taught her more songs and more dances and enchantments. They shared their food with her. Oh, at first she was reluctant to eat any of their food, for she had heard that anyone who ate food in fairyland would never be able to come out again. But a kind fairy gave her a small pouch of fern seed and told her to sprinkle it on any of her food. And so that was okay. Well, if she was not exactly happy, she was certainly not unhappy. And then one day, as Chanterelle found herself near the edge of that fairy ring, she heard a sound far away but coming closer from outside the ring. She thought to herself, it seemed familiar, but she couldn't exactly remember. Oh, and then she knew. It was the bleating of a lamb, probably lost and looking for its mother. And then she heard another sound. It was the voice of Ewan, the shepherd's son. And she said to herself, they need my help. And she went to the very edge of the fairy ring. But one of the fairies said, what are you doing? Where are you going? I must go, she said. I'm needed. You can't leave, said the fairy. And then Chanterelle remembered her mother's words. A trail will lead you into the woods, but iron and silver will lead you home again. And she reached into her pocket for the two things that she had brought with her into fairyland, the silver locket and the iron nail. All at once the fairy stepped back in alarm. What do you have there? A silver locket given to me by my mother with her blessing, and an iron nail, a gift from a shepherd lad. Suddenly there was great commotion in fairyland. She has silver and iron and a mother's blessing. The fairy queen appeared. What is the meaning of this? She said. We have been kind to you. We have accepted you and treated you as one of our own. We have taught you and fed you. But this is a betrayal. Iron and silver and a mother's blessing? You are no longer welcome here. And the fairy queen almost shoved Chanterelle out of that fairy ring. She found herself shading her eyes in the sunlight and looking up into the face of Ewan, the shepherd's son, with a lamb in his arms and a look of pure astonishment on his face. Chanterelle, he said, is that you? Ewan, she said, is that you? Well, she remembered Ewan as a boy with always tousled hair and a freckled nose, but now he was a good head taller than she was, and very handsome. And she could see by the look on his face that she had changed too. And so they followed that trail back to the house, talking nonstop all the way. Ewan told her that she had been gone not for a few days, as she supposed, but for 7 years. And in that 7 years, much had happened. His father, who had not been well for many years, had died and left the care of the sheep to Ewan. Chanterelle's stepmother had also died, although more recently. People said that she had eaten mushrooms that proved to be poisonous. So now the house and the estate belonged to Chanterelle. Of course, all of the servants had left, all but Ewan, who watched the sheep, and the cook, who was convinced that someday Chanterelle would return, and she wanted to be there to welcome her. When Chanterelle entered through the kitchen door, the cook gave a shout of delight and welcomed her with open arms and a big hug. And then, well, what happened is what you have imagined. Chanterelle and Ewan were married, and they lived in that house and raised their children there. And they were very happy. And if sometimes Chanterelle, searching for mushrooms, found herself in the woods, and if she saw a fairy ring and heard the sound of laughter and singing coming from inside the ring, and if she saw out of the corner of her eye the fairies dancing, she made sure to keep well away from the edge of that ring. And she also made sure that she and Ewan and their children always carried with them in their pockets silver and iron, just in case. And so, as you may have guessed, they lived happily ever after. And that is the story of the Trail of Mushrooms.